Getting ahead of ourselves there. That were the first 5 inductees. Keith Dunstan, a tremendous journalist and a fine gentleman, died 1 month ago today. Accepting Keith's honour tonight is his son, David. Please welcome David to the stage.
It is a great pleasure to be able to accept this award on behalf of my father, Keith Dunstan. It's also rather sad that he could not be here tonight to accept it in person, as he would have so very much liked to have done. Keith died a month ago, aged 88. We discussed this event as it was approaching in tandem with his final illness. He would have appreciated the company of fellow inductees, especially his old editor, Harry Gordon, and the son of his mentor and boss, Sir Keith Murdoch. Keith was a working journalist all his life, except perhaps for a stint in the Air Force in World War II. Even when he was making wine in retirement on the Mornington Peninsula in the 1990s, he was still a regular columnist with The Age. He started getting published in the Melbourne newspapers in 1944, and he still had bylines to his credit this year. Those of us who are old enough to remember him as a Melbourne institution, writing A Place in the Sun, in the Sun News Pictorial, for 27 years, from 1958 to 1985. He was, I think, both a remarkable and fortunate figure. He was fortunate to have lived and worked in a great age of newspapers, from the 1950s through to the 1980s, when circulations and readership peaked. He never wanted to be anything but a journalist. The story has been told about how his powerful father, Bill Dunstan VC, who was the general manager of the Herald and Weekly Times, wanted him to be an engineer. Journalists, Dunstan Senior thought, were a disreputable lot, and if his son became one, he would be unlikely ever to earn much money. In time, his father accepted his choice, and Keith long outlived any difficulties or benefits associated with being the boss's son. Quite early, he reflected on the craft of being a writer and how he might make something of it. He learned from others. Comics got him started. But later on, when he was given the job of writing day by day for the Courier Mail in Brisbane, he read the great newspaper columnists like San Francisco's legendary Herb Caen or the London Daily Mirror's Cassandra. He had his contemporaries as well, like the Herald's Bill Tipping, or his Sydney and Bulletin colleague, Ross Campbell, or the Perth Daily News columnist, Kerwin Ward. The daily columnist was the human and recognisable face in the paper that was so often a record of disaster and mayhem. Being a columnist had a special appeal, and they were a select band who swapped stories in an emergency. Lawrence Money has stolen my thunder about the Mayday story, but it's a true one. Introducing an early collection of Keith's journalism supporting a column, his friend and fellow columnist Bill Tipping quoted the legendary sports columnist of the New York Herald, Red Smith, who said that writing a daily column was the simplest thing in the world. All you have to do is saddle up at your typewriter every day, no matter where you are or where you've been the night before, and start tapping away, every word a drop of blood. And when you fill the space waiting there to be filled every day, as inevitable as death, you say to yourself, there goes another chip off the brain, Smith, but you've got to eat. Someday, some academic will write a good study of this heyday of Australian columnists and their journalism. Keith Dunstan will, I think, provide a fair bit of copy. My father had the knack of getting his readers to feel they were his friend, as his own friend Barry Humphries has observed. Whether it was the frequent self-deprecation, the gentle manner, or the alluring phrase, it was hard to tell. Keith Dunstan in life was as he was in his writings, a gentle, easygoing and witty man. He enjoyed life, had boyish enthusiasms, and appreciated and found delight in the enthusiasms of others. He was always alert to the prospect of a paragraph from family or friends or colleagues. If you had a new gadget or wine to sell, or there was a visiting celebrity in town, or an up-country tourist attraction to promote, he was your man. Posterity will remember him for his devotion to bicycling, through which he helped to influence the social habits and transport options of Melbourne. In this he led by example, good-humouredly riding off to work during a public transport strike from his suburban home in East Malvern in the early 1970s. He continued to do this when the trams and trains returned, often in his best gear, pitied and abused by the car-worshipping majority. When John Morgan, editor of The Sun, suggested he ride his bicycle across America for the nation's bicentennial in 1976, he and my mother did it. Incredible. His individualism had already been steeled, though by having ever so gently mocked Melburnians' obsession with their version of football, the Anti-Football League, which he and fellow journalist Douglas Wilkie founded. They were the only two non-football writing journalists on the third editorial floor of the Herald Sun building in Flinders Street one Sunday afternoon in 1967. There ought to be some society to protect us from all this, Wilkie said to Dunstan. And so there was. Dunstan saw to that. Very early he realised that he could tap into the gripes and prejudices of others, as well as his own. The societies he formed are a roll call of social causes of the most enduring and amusing kind. The Exit Club was for those who were booted out of restaurants for not wearing a tie. Or the UGG, Ungodly Horror Awards, given to particularly inappropriate examples of modern architecture. He was a good observer of social trends, coming as he did timidly out of the straight-laced world of old Melbourne, with its puritanism and wowsers, prudishness, Sabbatarianism, pompous businessmen and haughty professionals. He chronicled their antics and poked fun, but most of all he poked fun at himself. What a tyro he was for work. I remember as a small boy him tapping away in the hours of the morning, most mornings in fact, whether it was the history of the Melbourne Cricket Club, scripts for Hector Crawford, moonlighting columns for the Bulletin, or just his Saturday feature. Then came the books, The Paddock That Grew, which was the history of the MCG, and his quartet, Wowsers, Knockers, Sports, and Ratbags, which summed up the Australian character. There was a serious side to Keith Dunstan. He enjoyed appearing on television, on Meet the Press. Why he did not have a big television or radio career, I do not know. He spoke wonderfully, had a fine voice, looked as if he was 25 at least until he was in his mid-50s, and could think on his feet. He applied for a political posting in Canberra, but was knocked back. Perhaps he was just too good at what he was doing and too popular with the readers. He never made it into management on the 4th floor at Flinders Street, Walnut Alley, as his good friend, the Herald journalist Noel Hawken, contemptuously called it. They offered him his own room as a sign of status, but he knocked that back. He found that removed from the other reporters, who were too good a source of paragraphs, was a problem. He found also that providing them with good coffee assisted as well. So instead he had a little fenced corral on the edge of a sea of reporters' desks. As we know, he never really retired. No sooner was he at a loose end in 1985 than The Age under Creighton Burns picked him up. Then there were more books to write, some 30 of them by last count, many of them commissioned by admirers or done in conjunction with old friends, like the cartoonist Jeff Hook. Then came the experiment with the Vineyard, and more autobiographies, including No Brains at All and the ones on drink and bicycling. While others of his profession drifted into public relations or academia, or God forbid, even worse, politics, Keith Dunstan never stopped writing. His was a writing life, sustained by newspapers and journalism, which craft he mastered early and understood well. He was especially pleased to know in the last weeks of his life that he would be so honoured by his friends, colleagues and peers in this profession and in this way. And for this I pass on his thanks and those of his family as well.
If you got your plaque, David, I'll bring it down. That's okay. In recognition of Keith Dunstan's fine achievements over so many decades, the Melbourne Press Club Committee has decided to rename the annual quill for Best Columnist the Keith Dunstan Award, starting from next year as well.